The night was silent except for the rustling of leaves as Daniel Carter made his way through the dense forest. The moonlight barely reached the forest floor, casting eerie shadows between the towering trees. He had been hiking for hours, enjoying the solitude, but now an unsettling feeling crept into his mind, like he was being watched. Daniel tightened his grip on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The trail ahead was barely visible, but he knew these woods well. He had spent much of his childhood exploring them. Yet, something about tonight felt different. The air was colder than usual, and the silence was too deep. Even the usual sounds of crickets and distant owls were absent. Then he heard it, a faint whisper, almost like the wind carrying a voice. Daniel. He froze. His heart pounded in his chest. Had he imagined it? The whisper came again, this time clearer, a soft, almost pleading voice. Daniel, help me. His breath hitched. Slowly, he turned his flashlight toward the source of the voice. There, standing between the trees, was a girl. At first, he thought she was human, but as he stepped closer, his mind rejected that idea. She was different. Her silver eyes reflected the flashlight like a wild animal's, and strange, faintly glowing markings covered her pale skin. Her hair, long and dark, had a slight shimmer to it, almost as if the strands absorbed the light rather than reflected it. She looked weak, her arms wrapped around herself as if she was cold. Her legs were bare and scratched, as if she had been running through the woods without care for the thorns and rocks. Who are you?" Daniel asked cautiously. The girl blinked slowly, as if she was struggling to stay awake. Then she spoke again, her voice trembling. "You don't remember me." Daniel frowned. "Remember you? I've never seen you before." She shook her head, taking a shaky step forward. "No, you have. A long time ago." Daniel took a step back instinctively. His mind raced. How could this strange girl know him? He had no memory of her, and yet something deep inside stirred, like a forgotten dream trying to surface. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, keeping his distance. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The girl looked at him, her silver eyes filled with something he couldn't quite understand. Was it sadness? Hope? Fear? Before she could answer, a loud crack echoed through the forest, a branch snapping. Daniel spun around, scanning the trees with his flashlight. Nothing, but his instincts screamed that something was there, watching, waiting. He turned back to the girl. "Come with me. It's not safe here." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Daniel led her back toward his cabin, his mind full of unanswered questions. Who was she? How did she know his name? And why did he feel like this was only the beginning of something much bigger than himself? As they disappeared into the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes watched them from the shadows. The night was far from over. Daniel pushed open the wooden door of his cabin and guided the strange girl inside. The cabin was small but cozy, a single room with a fireplace, a bed, a worn-out couch, and a wooden table cluttered with books and tools. He quickly shut the door behind them, locking it out of instinct. The girl stood in the dim light, her silver eyes scanning the room. She looked exhausted, her bare feet covered in dirt, her strange markings faintly glowing in the warm glow of the lantern Daniel lit. "You should sit down," Daniel said, pulling out a chair for her. She hesitated but then nodded and sat, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to keep warm. Daniel poured a cup of water from a jug and handed it to her. "Here, drink." She took the cup with shaky hands and sipped the water slowly. For a few moments, there was only silence. Daniel leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "All right. Now tell me, who are you? And how do you know my name?" The girl placed the cup down and looked at him with an unreadable expression. "My name is Soraya." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Soraya? That's not a name I've heard before." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "It's not from this world." Daniel frowned. Not from this world. You mean, you're an alien? Saria nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel let out a nervous chuckle, shaking his head. This has to be a joke. There's no way. I'm telling the truth, Daniel. Something in her voice made him stop. It wasn't just the way she spoke. It was the way she looked at him, like she truly believed he should know her. All right, Daniel said, exhaling. Let's say I believe you. How do you know me? Saria lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. Because we met before. A long time ago. Daniel's stomach twisted. That's impossible. I would remember meeting an alien. She shook her head. No, you wouldn't. Because they made you forget. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Who? The ones who sent me here, she said softly. The ones who didn't want you to remember. Daniel rubbed his forehead. This was insane. A strange girl appears in the woods, claiming to be an alien, saying they had met before, but his memory was erased. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie. You expect me to believe that? He asked, trying to stay calm. Saria looked at him with those glowing silver eyes, eyes that held something deep, something real. I can prove it. Daniel hesitated. How? She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and placed her hand over his. The moment their skin touched, Daniel felt a sudden rush of heat, like an electric current running through him. His vision blurred, and for a split second, flashes of something, memories, flooded his mind. A vast alien sky, a glowing city with towers that stretched into the clouds, a young girl with silver eyes, laughing as she ran through golden fields. And then, darkness. Daniel gasped, jerking his hand away. His heart pounded as he stared at Saria in shock. What was that? He whispered. Saria's expression was sad but hopeful. Pieces of what was taken from you. Daniel ran a shaky hand through his hair. This can't be real. It is. She leaned forward, her voice pleading. I've been searching for you for years, Daniel. I broke the rules to find you. But now, they know I'm here. Daniel swallowed. Who knows? A loud crash sounded outside. Saria's eyes widened. Them. Daniel jumped to his feet and grabbed the hunting rifle he kept near the door. The night outside was dark, but in the distance, he saw strange red lights moving between the trees. Saria, what's going on? She stood, her body tense. They found me. And now, they'll come for you too. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened as the lights came closer. He didn't understand everything yet, but one thing was clear. This night was far from over. Daniel's grip tightened around the rifle as the red lights moved closer through the trees. The air outside felt heavy, almost unnatural. His instincts screamed that whoever, or whatever, was coming wasn't human. Saria stood beside him, her silver eyes locked on the approaching figures. Her markings glowed faintly, reacting to something unseen. We don't have much time, she whispered. Daniel glanced at her. Who are they? They're called retrievers, she said, her voice tense. They hunt beings like me. And now, they'll take you too. Daniel's heart pounded. Why me? I'm just a normal guy. Saria shook her head. No, you're not. You were part of something bigger, something they don't want you to remember. Daniel wanted to argue, to tell her this was all some mistake, but deep down, he felt something inside him stir, an uneasiness, like an old memory just out of reach. Outside, the red lights split apart. 4 figures emerged from the shadows, their movements unnaturally smooth. They wore dark, armored suits that seemed to shimmer under the moonlight. Their faces were hidden behind sleek helmets, and their hands held strange devices that pulsed with blue energy. One of them raised a scanner, and a thin red beam swept across the cabin. Daniel ducked instinctively. Can they see us? Not yet, Saria said, but her voice wasn't reassuring. They're scanning for energy traces. My presence here is like a beacon. We need to move. Daniel exhaled sharply, trying to think. His cabin had a back exit, but it led straight into the deeper part of the forest. There were no roads, no neighbors for miles. If we run, they'll just track us, he said. Saria hesitated. Not if we break the signal first. Daniel frowned. How? She placed a hand on the wall, her markings glowing brighter. The wooden surface trembled slightly, and suddenly, the lights inside the cabin flickered and went out. Outside, the scanning beam glitched, then stopped. One of the armored figures stiffened. Energy disturbance detected. A metallic voice announced. They know something's wrong, Saria whispered. But it buys us a few minutes. Daniel didn't waste time. He grabbed a small backpack, stuffing it with essentials. Water, a flashlight, a knife, and extra bullets. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but he wasn't going to face it unprepared. Saria grabbed his wrist. This way, she urged. She led him to a trapdoor in the floor, one he had almost forgotten existed. His grandfather had built it years ago as an emergency escape, leading to an underground tunnel that connected to an old hunting trail. How did you know about this? He asked, surprised. Saria looked at him with a small, knowing smile. Because we used it before. Daniel's stomach twisted, but now wasn't the time for questions. He followed her down into the tunnel, closing the trapdoor just as a loud crash echoed above them. The retrievers had broken in. Darkness swallowed them as they moved through the narrow passage. Daniel switched on his flashlight, keeping the beam low. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Behind them, faint footsteps echoed from above. The retrievers were searching the cabin. Daniel whispered, "Where does this lead?" Saria didn't slow down. "To a clearing near the river. If we can get there, I can call for help." Daniel almost laughed. "Call for help? How?" Saria hesitated. "I have a signal device, but it's weak. I need to be near water to amplify it." Before Daniel could question her further, they reached the tunnel's end. Saria pushed open a hidden door, and cool night air rushed in. They stepped out into the open, the river just a few yards away. The water shimmered under the moonlight, its surface calm and silent. Saria knelt, pressing her palm against the ground. Her markings pulsed brighter. "Come on, work," she muttered. Daniel kept watch, scanning the trees for movement. His instincts screamed that they weren't safe yet. Then, a sound cut through the night. Metallic footsteps. The retrievers had found them. A red laser beam sliced through the trees, hitting the ground inches from Daniel's foot. He grabbed Saria and pulled her behind a rock just as another shot blasted the earth where they had been standing. "They're not trying to capture us," Daniel realized. "They're trying to kill us." Saria clenched her jaw. "They don't need me alive. They only need my genetic data. And they can't let you escape." Daniel's pulse raced. He had no idea what was happening. But one thing was clear. These weren't just ordinary hunters. They were something much worse. As the retrievers closed in, Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. He didn't know if bullets would work against them, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Saria's markings flared one last time. And then, a bright blue light burst from the river, shooting into the sky. Daniel shielded his eyes as a deep hum vibrated through the air. The retrievers froze. Then, a voice, calm but powerful, echoed through the clearing. "Stand down. He is under our protection." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Who was speaking? And why did it feel like his life was about to change forever? The bright blue light from the river pulsed, casting eerie shadows across the trees. The deep hum grew louder, vibrating in Daniel's chest. He had no idea what was happening, but he could tell one thing. The retrievers were hesitating. The voice that had spoken a moment ago was deep and commanding, yet it seemed to come from nowhere. The armored figures, who had been ready to fire just seconds ago, now stood frozen. Then, in a sudden motion, the retrievers retreated. Their red lights flickered, and without a word, They turned and disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened as he watched them go. What just happened? Saria let out a shaky breath, her silver eyes still glowing. They received a direct order. They can't go against it. Daniel frowned. Whose order? Saria looked toward the river. The blue light faded slightly, but the air still thrummed with energy. Someone who outranks them. Daniel wasn't sure if that answer made him feel better or worse. He turned to Saria, his frustration bubbling up. No more secrets. You keep saying I was part of something before, that I should remember you. I don't. So tell me the truth. Saria hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll tell you everything. She took a deep breath before speaking. Years ago, you weren't just an ordinary child, Daniel. You were chosen, one of a handful of humans taken for a first contact experiment. Our people wanted to form a deep connection between our species, but for the bond to be successful, it had to start when we were young. Daniel's stomach twisted. You're saying, I was taken, kidnapped. Saria shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't like that. You were selected, but it was meant to be temporary. You lived among my people. You trained, learned, and bonded with someone. Daniel felt a strange pressure in his head, like something was pushing against his mind. His memories felt foggy, but something about her words felt true. With you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Saria nodded. Yes, we were paired together, and it worked. Our bond was strong, stronger than anyone expected. Daniel swallowed hard. Then why don't I remember? Her expression darkened. Because when the experiment ended, the ones in charge didn't want the connection to remain. So they erased your memories before returning you to Earth. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. That's impossible. But even as he said it, a deep unease filled his chest. Could it be true? Saria stepped closer. I never forgot you, Daniel. And when I became old enough, I went searching for you. Daniel's mind was spinning. That still doesn't explain why the retrievers are after you. Why do they care so much? Saria hesitated. Because I broke the law. I wasn't supposed to come to Earth, but I did. And when they found out I was looking for you, they saw you as a threat too. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. A threat? Yes, Saria whispered. Because even though they erased your memories, the bond never fully disappeared. And if you remember everything, you'll be able to do things you never thought possible. Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. This is insane. I can prove it, Saria said softly. She lifted her hand again, just like before. Daniel hesitated. The last time she touched him, he had seen strange visions, but now he wanted answers. Slowly, he reached out and let her touch his forehead. The moment she did, his mind exploded with memories, flashes of the past. He saw himself, a younger version, standing on an alien world. The sky was a deep violet, 2 suns burning in the distance. Towering crystalline structures surrounded him, glowing faintly. And beside him was Saria, only younger, her silver eyes filled with joy. He saw them running together, laughing, training under the guidance of an alien mentor. He saw himself learning to read their language, understanding their technology. And something else, a connection between them, a telepathic link. Then, darkness, pain, flashes of people in long robes arguing in a strange language, a machine humming. And then, Earth, a small boy, alone, confused, with no memory of anything before. His past had been stolen from him. Back to reality. Daniel gasped and stumbled back, breaking the connection. His head throbbed, his heart racing. Saria watched him carefully. Do you believe me now? Daniel's breath came fast. He didn't want to believe it, but he couldn't deny what he had just seen. He wasn't just an ordinary man. He had lived another life. And now, the people who erased that life were coming for him. He looked at Saria, determination burning in his chest. What do we do now? Saria's lips pressed into a thin line. We run, because they won't stop until they have you. Daniel glanced at the dark forest, at the place where the retrievers had disappeared. His past was lost. His future was unknown. But one thing was clear. His life would never be the same again. Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding as the memories faded from his mind. His entire life had been a lie. He wasn't just an ordinary man. He had lived another life, one that had been stolen from him. He turned to Saria, who was watching him closely, waiting for his reaction. Her silver eyes held sadness, but also hope. She had risked everything to find him. Daniel ran a shaky hand through his hair. So, all of this is real. I was taken. My memories were erased. Saria nodded. Yes, and now that your connection is awakening, they will stop at nothing to make sure you never remember the rest. Daniel clenched his fists. The retrievers had already tried to take Saria. Now, they would come for him too. He needed to make a choice, stay and fight or run. He exhaled sharply. What do we do now? Saria's expression hardened. We need to leave this place. If we stay, they'll track us again. Daniel grabbed his backpack, checking its contents, some food, a flashlight, a knife, and extra bullets for his rifle. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Where do we go? Saria looked up at the sky, where the last traces of the blue signal she had sent had begun to fade. I sent out a call for help. If someone from my people receives it, they might come for us. Daniel frowned. Might. She hesitated. It's complicated. Not all of them will want to help. Some will see you as a danger, just like the retrievers do. Daniel felt frustration rise in his chest. So I have nowhere to go. Saria placed a hand on his arm. You're not alone in this, Daniel. I promise. But we have to move. The journey begins. The two of them moved through the forest, the night air cool against their skin. The woods were eerily silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath. As they walked, Daniel kept his rifle ready, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. He didn't trust that the retrievers had completely backed off. How far do we have to go? He asked. There's an old shelter hidden deep in the woods, Saria explained. It's not much, but it has supplies. And more importantly, it has a shield that blocks tracking signals. Daniel frowned. How do you know about it? Saria glanced at him. Because you and I built it. When we were kids. Daniel stopped walking. His chest tightened. What? She nodded. It was one of our secret places, a place only we knew. Daniel searched his mind for the memory, but it was still just out of reach. The pieces were coming back slowly, but not enough to feel real. He shook his head and started walking again. All right, let's find it. An unexpected attack. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Saria suddenly stopped. Her body tensed, her silver eyes scanning the trees. Daniel immediately raised his rifle. What is it? She didn't answer. She simply grabbed his hand and pulled him down behind a fallen tree. A second later, a red laser beam shot past where they had been standing. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. They had found them. Saria whispered, They're closer than I thought. Daniel peeked over the log and saw two retrievers moving silently through the trees. They weren't scanning this time. They already knew where to look. They're hunting us, Daniel muttered. Saria's grip on his arm tightened. We can't fight them head-on. We have to be smart. Daniel looked around, searching for a way out. Then he spotted it, a ledge just ahead, covered in thick vines. If we climb down that, we can disappear into the canyon below, he whispered. Saria nodded. Let's go. They moved as quietly as possible, staying low. But as they reached the ledge, one of the retrievers suddenly turned their head directly toward them. A red beam of light locked onto Daniel's chest. He shoved Saria aside just as a pulse blast shot toward him. He barely dodged in time. The ground where he had been standing exploded, sending dirt flying. "Run!" Soraya shouted. Daniel didn't hesitate. He leaped off the ledge, grabbing onto the thick vines. His hands burned as he slid down, his feet scraping against the rock. Soraya followed, landing beside him just as another blast hit the edge above them, sending rocks tumbling down. They ran through the thick canyon, jumping over fallen logs, slipping through narrow passageways. The sound of footsteps above told them the retrievers were still following, but the canyon walls blocked their direct line of sight. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. Soraya ducked inside first, pulling Daniel in after her. She placed her hands on the rocky entrance, and her markings pulsed with a soft glow. A faint shimmering barrier spread across the cave's entrance. Daniel stared in amazement. "What did you just do?" Soraya let out a breath. "It's a temporary shield. They won't be able to track us inside. For now." Daniel leaned against the cave wall, trying to catch his breath. That was way too close. Soraya sat beside him, her silver eyes filled with concern. "They won't stop coming. But your memories, they're returning, aren't they?" Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, slowly, but it's happening." She smiled softly. "Then there's still hope." Daniel looked at her. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't running away anymore. If they wanted to take his past from him again, they were going to have to fight for it. And this time, he was ready. Daniel sat inside the hidden cave, his breath still heavy from the chase. The faint blue shimmer of the shield Soraya had placed at the entrance flickered like a thin veil, hiding them from the outside world. The sound of rushing water from the waterfall covered any noise they made. For now, they were safe. Soraya sat across from him, her silver eyes filled with both exhaustion and relief. "They won't find us here, at least not right away." Daniel nodded but remained tense. He had barely processed everything that had happened in the last few hours. His entire life had been turned upside down. First, he found a strange alien girl in the woods who claimed to know him from his forgotten past. Then, he discovered that his memories had been erased, that he had once lived among an alien race, and that he had formed a special bond with Soraya, a bond powerful enough that people wanted to erase him from existence. And now, they were being hunted. Daniel looked down at his hands, still slightly shaking from the adrenaline rush. "They won't stop, will they?" Soraya shook her head. "No, now that you're starting to remember, they will do anything to stop it." Daniel clenched his fists. "But why? What are they so afraid of?" Soraya hesitated, then sighed. "It's not just about you, Daniel. It's about what we became together." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Soraya looked down at her hands, as if choosing her words carefully. "During our time together in my world, we weren't just friends. We were connected. A deep mental and emotional bond was formed between us, one that wasn't supposed to happen between a human and someone like me." Daniel's mind flashed back to the memories she had shown him. The young boy laughing, running through alien landscapes, learning their ways, always with Soraya by his side. She continued, "They wanted to see if a human could adapt to our kind, but you did more than that. You didn't just learn our ways, Daniel. You became one of us. And I became part of you." Daniel swallowed hard. "So they erased everything." Soraya nodded. "They were afraid. Afraid that if you remembered, you'd awaken something inside you. Something powerful." Daniel let out a slow breath. "That explains why the retrievers are after me now. They think I'll be dangerous." Soraya met his gaze. "And they might be right. The hidden power." Daniel frowned. "What are you saying?" Soraya hesitated before taking his hand and placing it over his chest. "Close your eyes." Daniel wanted to question it, but something about the moment felt right. He closed his eyes. Then he felt it. A pulse. A deep vibration from within him, as if something had been locked away in his mind. a door that had been shut for years but was now being forced open. Images flickered through his mind. He saw himself in an alien training ground, standing before a glowing sphere of energy, reaching out his hand. He saw Saria beside him, guiding him, their hands intertwined as a golden energy connected them. And then he saw something even more shocking. Himself, lifting objects with his mind, manipulating energy, seeing into the thoughts of others. His eyes snapped open. He gasped, pulling his hand away. What? What was that? Saria's expression was serious. That's what they didn't want you to remember. The bond between us gave you abilities beyond what any human was supposed to have. Daniel felt his heart racing. Was this why they erased him? He looked down at his hands. If what Saria said was true, then he wasn't just someone who had been experimented on. He was something more. The decision. A noise outside snapped them both back to reality. A distant hum filled the air, the sound of approaching retrievers. They found us, Daniel muttered. Saria stood, her body tensed. The shield is breaking. We don't have much time. Daniel's mind was racing. He had two choices. Option 1. Keep running. Keep hiding. Avoid the fight. And hope they would somehow find a way to escape the planet. Option 2. Stop running. Face the people who took his past from him. Daniel exhaled and clenched his fists. I'm done running. Saria looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? Daniel met her gaze. I want to remember everything. I want to know who I was, and I want to fight back. Saria hesitated, but then a small smile appeared on her lips. Then we'll fight. Together. Daniel nodded. The cave trembled slightly as a mechanical voice echoed from outside. You are surrounded. Surrender now. Daniel took one last deep breath and gripped his rifle. But this time, it wasn't just a weapon in his hands. It was his choice to stand and fight for the life they had stolen from him. And this time, he wouldn't let them take anything else. The cave trembled as the retriever's mechanical voice echoed from outside. You are surrounded. Surrender now. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. He wasn't just afraid anymore. He was angry. They had erased his memories, stolen his past, and now they wanted to take away his future too. Saria placed a hand on his arm. We have one chance. We have to fight our way out. Daniel looked at her, nodding. How many are out there? She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing. Then she whispered, 4. No, 5. They're spread out. 2 on the left, 3 near the entrance. Daniel frowned. We can't take them head on. They have better weapons. Saria's silver eyes gleamed. We don't need to fight with weapons. You just need to remember what you're capable of. Daniel exhaled sharply. I don't even know how. Saria grabbed both his hands. Trust me. He stared at her for a moment, then closed his eyes. As soon as he did, a wave of energy pulsed through him. His mind opened, and flashes of his lost memories flooded back. He saw himself, years ago, standing on an alien training ground, learning how to control energy, to manipulate movement, to think beyond human limits. He had done things no human was supposed to do. The knowledge returned like a rushing river. Daniel's eyes snapped open, filled with new understanding. He looked at his hands. I know what to do. Saria smiled. Then let's do it. The battle begins. Outside, the retrievers moved in. Their weapons hummed, ready to fire. But before they could, the cave exploded with light. Daniel and Saria burst through the shield, moving faster than the retrievers expected. One of the soldiers turned and aimed his weapon, but Daniel was already moving. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just reacting. He felt the energy around him, guiding his movements. His instincts were sharper, his reflexes faster. The first retriever fired, but Daniel dodged effortlessly, the beam missing him by inches. Before the soldier could fire again, Daniel raised his hand, and suddenly, the soldier's weapon flew out of his grip, landing in the dirt. The retriever took a step back. Impossible. Daniel didn't wait. He rushed forward, striking fast. The soldier collapsed. Meanwhile, Saria moved like a blur, using her speed and precision to disable 2 more soldiers before they could react. The remaining retrievers hesitated. This wasn't the weak, defenseless human they had been expecting. This was something else entirely. One of them pressed a button on his wrist. "Command, we have a problem." "The human is." Before he could finish, Daniel reached out, and the communication device on the soldier's wrist shattered. The retriever looked at him in shock. "What are you?" Daniel exhaled. "I'm just taking back what you stole." The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. Then, without another word, they turned and fled. Saria watched them disappear into the night. "They'll be back with more." Daniel nodded. "Then we have to leave before that happens." A final goodbye. They moved quickly through the forest, heading for an open clearing. Saria stopped and pulled out a small metallic device. She pressed a button, and a soft blue light pulsed from it. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" "A signal beacon. Someone from my world will find it," she said. Daniel stared at the pulsing light. He knew what it meant. If he stepped into that ship, he was leaving Earth forever. Saria watched him carefully. "You don't have to come with me, Daniel. I know this is your home." Daniel looked back at the dark forest, at the place where his ordinary life had ended. He thought about the small cabin, the quiet days, the normal world he had once lived in. But deep down, he knew the truth. That life was never real. His real life had been stolen from him. And now he had the chance to take it back. He turned to Saria. "I'm coming with you." Saria smiled. "Then let's go home." A new beginning. Minutes later, the sky rippled with light as a ship descended. It was sleek, metallic, and unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The door opened, and Daniel took one last look at the world he had known. Then, without hesitation, he stepped inside. As the ship rose into the stars, Daniel knew there was no turning back. He had spent years living a life that wasn't truly his. Now he was ready to find out who he really was. And this time, no one would take it from him.